Yeah.
Actually, is that good sound? Or good sound?
That's good.
Okay.
Good, Karen.
So, am I gonna turn down? No, oof, she's not talking over.
I'm not talking. That's why you can't hear me. Sorry, I stopped.
All right. So, y'all, this is Anne LaFleur. She and I have gotten to know each other through a nearness cohort and have been talking over the past year about what she does, about what I do. And so this is something she and I have been talking about for a while, and I'm really excited to see it all come together. So I will turn it over to her. And if there's anything on this end and you need me to facilitate, just let me know. But otherwise, you are up on the wall, projected, and we're good to go.
Amazing. Well, and thank you. I have to admit, this is the first time I've ever been like live streamed into a space. So this is like a milestone for me. It's very exciting. And I'm also just really appreciating the whatever is happening on the wall, like that mural. That is gorgeous. And I kind of wish I had that. Anyway, hello, good afternoon. I'm Anne LaFleur. I'm not going to do a huge intro, but I will say, just by way of background, my training is actually in clinical social work, but what I've specialized in over the past decade, actually more than a decade, is this topic of connection and belonging, both how to build and strengthen our relationship to ourselves, but also how to strengthen relationships in community with other people. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides and stuff.
And you should have permission.
Let's see. I can raise my hand. What can I do? Oh, yes. There it is. Gorgeous. And just want to make sure that I share the right one. There. Okay. And I don't need to share audio, so we're going to not do that. Okay. There. Okay, so we're going to call this Strengthening the Web of Belonging. And here's a quick agenda of what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what belonging feels like and why it matters to you. So thank you to everybody who filled out the survey, especially at the last minute. I was a little rushing coming on because I was trying to compile and include as many people's answers as possible. So we'll talk about what you all said on that survey. We will talk about, I've got a bunch of different diagrams I'm going to filter in throughout the presentation. The first one is this 3 parts of a human being, which is a really nice way to give us a shorthand for talking about the different ways that we can relate to each other in community. We'll talk about why belonging matters, not just for us as individuals, but for your community as a church. And the dynamics of how do we strengthen connections and how do we also weaken connections. And that part will also include another diagram around kind of what happens when relationships are strong. What does that look like? How does that impact the people involved? And then when they get weakened, how does that happen? And then when things get off track with someone, with lots of someones, how do you repair that? And in particular, what are you responsible for in that and what are you not responsible for? And finally, we've got some next steps. I've got a little bit of a homework assignment for folks who are up for it. And then we've got this series of evening dinner / discussion / workshops coming up in March and April, where we get to practice all the different ways of strengthening connection with each other. So here we go. So this is, oh, and I guess I'll say there's going to be parts of it where you will have a chance to sort of talk with each other, but also if at any point you have a question or a comment or thing or something, I may or may not see you raise your hand, but Rachel or somebody just speak up and say, hey, we have a question, because I'm happy to make this as interactive as you want it to be. Okay, so here is, I love word cloud software, and this is what I was able to compile with the responses that I got on the survey. So I asked that first question, what does belonging feel like to you? And this is what folks said. I just want to give you a minute to look at it. It's interesting. So the bigger the word, the more said it, or I merged a couple things together. Comfort, comfortable, things like that. But as you look at this, does this feel like a reflection of how you understand belonging, or is there anything else that you notice about it? All right. And I hope when you're looking at those words, when I look at those words anyway, like, and I let them sink in, like there is a feeling associated with that that's like, like I can relax here. I can be myself here. And isn't that what you want? Just in life, but also in particular in a community like yours. Okay. So I had another question on the survey that asked, why is belonging important to you? And I don't have space on the slide to include everybody's answers, but I wanted to call out a number of them that kind of represented the different types of things that were said. Here's one. Why is belonging important? Because it's nice to feel accepted. And it's a feeling that everyone should be able to experience. Like I want this for myself, but I want this for other people and for the world. I don't have close friends, so having a place to connect with people periodically makes me feel less alone. Super important. Being able to be part of a bigger life outside of myself. We can't make it through life by ourselves. Having a community to belong to lightens the weight of living. I love the poetry of that phrase. It just makes it easier. It enhances the worship experience. I love that one. And then this one, there were like several different people who actually landed something like this. It helps to keep me coming back. If I don't belong, then I will not attend. Like literally, I don't want to be in a place where I don't feel like I belong. And to the extent that we have a lot of choices about where we go to worship, where we go to spend our time, what communities we want to belong to, this is huge and relevant. Are there any other reasons why belonging is important that are not up here? Maybe I didn't get to you in time, or does anything occur to you that maybe should be on this list? And I can see you if you raise your hand. Okay. We'll keep going.
Oh, we got one hand.
It's too fast. Yeah.
It's sort of what the first one is, but something about like I can be my total self if I belong. Like I don't have to be on, I don't have to be perfect, I don't have to, I can be my full messy self if I belong.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. You don't have to like cut off parts of yourself or like overemphasize or underemphasize or anything like that. Like I can just be. Yeah, what a relief that is. Yeah, totally.
I'm off camera, but for me, I feel like I won't be judged or having judgment eyes on me. That's what makes me feel belonged in a certain place.
Yeah.
For me, at least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's huge.
At least in regards to church, I think that a lot of us come from groups that maybe don't belong other places in Texas. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that we have at least one place that we belong.
Yeah.
Place for that.
Yeah. And I hear with that also like acceptance, like this place where you're going to be accepted for you and how you are and who you are. Yeah.
Leads into what I was gonna say. Like I know what it feels like not to belong. And that's an awful feeling.
Yes.
Feeling like I belong is an important thing to have.
Yeah. yeah, really kind of fundamental to our well-being as humans. And like, just to point out, like we were not designed to go through life on our own. So it was sort of reflected here, but like we are these social creatures that literally can't survive without each other. So it's not, it's not just a nice to have, it's like there's a sense of like it is a deep human like life or death need at some point that's kind of hardwired into us. So it's worth talking about. Okay. So said I had some diagrams. Here's my first one. And so for purposes of belonging, I think about human beings as consisting of 3 parts. So the first part is this core essence. Well, this is represented here with the sun. And the way I think about that is it's like the brilliance and aliveness that we connect to when we're at our best. It's where we have access to our best wisdom, our best creativity, like our deepest love. And also, because it's a truth setting, this is the place in me that's connected to God. Like when I am feeling the divine in me and through me and in life, like this is the part that accesses that. Then this blue shaded part is our unique humanity. So what is it that makes you you and not somebody else? So it's like your preferences, your skills, your beliefs, your habits, your background, like just the way you operate in the world that's different from everybody else, like everybody else. And then there's this outer layer that is our self-protective layer. So this is your defenses. This is what you do when you don't feel safe. And it's all different versions of fight, flight, freeze. I've also heard fake. Like, what are these things that we do when we can't like just be, like someone said earlier? And this can show up in a lot of different ways. Like some people sort of just run away. Some people get like defensive or aggressive. Some people get really quiet. Some people put on a fake front. There's things we do. It's a human thing. So it's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't super help for connection if that's primarily where we're operating from with other people. And so belonging, I guess just to wrap this one up, the feeling of belonging gives us the safety to kind of let down that self-protective outer shell and work more and operate more from that core essence part. So I'm going to do another diagram here. So this is my best representation of different people in a community, right? So we've each got different colors of shading representing all of our uniqueness. And in between the individual people, you've got lines that are either thicker or thinner or non-existent. That kind of represents like how strong is that positive connection person to person. And so in this particular diagram, these are not like, as a community, this is not a super strong community. We've got a few people who have strong connections with at least 1 or 2 others. But not everybody has like any meaningful connection at all with somebody. So if you think about like that little green circle down at the bottom left there, like if that person feels stress in their life or upset, or if they're going through something, like, is this a community that they're gonna want to stay in, or are they gonna look elsewhere for their comfort and their support and their help? Kind of a rhetorical question. I think we kind of know the answer to that. But then the other piece is for a community, if you think about like the times we are going through just as a society, as a country, as a world, like it's not just individual people going through their own stressors. There's stress kind of on everybody, everywhere in different ways. And so if you think about what happens to a community, like this particular community represented here, when there's a lot of stress on everybody, what you can see here is there's actually 2 different groups. Can you see that? Like the purple, pink, and like orange, like mini group on the side, and then there's another kind of mini group on the other side. What happens in communities if like not everybody is bound together sufficiently? What happens? I didn't hear that.
Like fractures.
Yeah, fractures, exactly. So this is where you get like schisms. This is where you get infighting. This is where you get like all of a sudden we're not here to support each other, but like actually we're in conflict with each other when we're supposed to be a community. So that for the survival of a church, like how many times have things fractured and gone apart, in other churches. So it matters. So here's more of a when connections are strong piece. And in this diagram, it's not that everybody is connected to every other person, but everybody's connected to somebody. And so if one person is feeling stress, or even if the system is feeling stress, like you have a way of holding each other up kind of in this web of belonging. So in hard times, you're there for each other, but also this is what creates group synergy, where you can together be so much more than just the sum of your parts, where together you can create like real movement and goodness and like amazing stuff, not just for yourselves, but out in the world. And it's the web of belonging and the strength of these connections that really makes that possible and fun. So how are connections built?
Talking to each other.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Well, how else? And think about the things you said on the survey.
Inviting people to do things with you.
Totally. Yeah. So you get invited somewhere that gets stronger. How else?
Interaction.
Yes. Yeah. Participation, interaction, talking. Yeah. Including. Yeah. What else?
I think listening is important.
Totally. Listening. Yeah. Yeah. So on the right is a whole bunch of things. And again, if yours is not included on here, I apologize. but these are the kinds of things. And it's interesting, like we know this, right? We know intuitively what helps us feel connected to a person and therefore to a community. And it's often just these small things, smiles and inclusion and listening and introductions and welcomes and participating in things. Sharing stuff, reaching out, being checked in on. Lots of people talked about that. Being asked questions, being included in conversations. Yeah, it's so much. And it was neat that I asked sort of two different ways, sort of in general, what makes you feel included, and then also what's helped specifically at St. Cornelius. And I'll read off just what's helped in your community, because I think it's nice to feel sort of recognition of what we're doing that's working. So what's helped create belonging at St. Cornelius? Socializing after service, acceptance and compassion, just as a general way of being. When offering help or when people offer to help me or check in on me. The friendly nature of the community members. People seem genuine, it's small. The pastor and others make me feel wanted. Ministries are open to join for everyone. The fact that people are willing to teach, welcoming me and my partner, asking me to engage, pushing me to grow, getting my input, opportunity to help. And then I love this one. Somebody acknowledged it's a slow process to feel part of something. And also acknowledge that there's a way in which each individual needs to make an effort to feel part. Like, so each of you just showing up is an important part. It doesn't just sort of happen onto you, of course. Okay. So I promised there would be a little bit of sharing time. So this is where, Rachel, I'm going to definitely need your help to manage the room a little bit, but I wanted to give you an opportunity just to share with each other. So it looks like there's enough people you can pair up, or if it's not even, you can maybe have a group of 3. But the invitation here is just to thinking about those little things that were on the list. Share with your partner a time when you gave to someone from your essence. Remember that sort of core part of you, and it made a positive difference for them. And it could be within the church community, or it could be outside. That either way is fine. And then also share a time when someone gave to you in a way that helped you access or remember your essence. So it might be a time when you gave to someone, like you followed up with somebody and you sent them a text and said how nice it was to see them or meet them or talk to them, for example, or a time when someone gave to you in a way that helped you. Somebody reached out to me when they hadn't seen me for a couple of weeks, and it made me feel important. It made me feel like my presence mattered, you know? So the way I want to set this up is, instead of it being like a two-way back and forth conversation for the sake of time, just decide who's going to go first and have one person just talk for 2 minutes. And then I'll try to get people's attention at about 2 minutes, and then you'll switch and have the other person talk and answer the questions. Does that all make sense?
Yes. And I'll have a timer on my end too, so I'll watch with you.
Oh, gorgeous. Okay, that sounds perfect. All right, ready, go.
So there's two guys in the UK. And then the second one is the opposite. You actually get to use a person coming I wasn't even thinking I was doing it.
Okay, first of all,
Well, I don't know if anybody can hear me, but that's about 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. If you haven't switched, go ahead and switch.
Yeah, okay. So, it's like, you know,
And then.
I was a teacher for 12 years. They were.
So that's about 2 minutes for the second person.
I guess.
And I'm gonna rely on Rachel to help. Close it.
For me, one of my friends was not doing it. I spent multiple nights trying to help him.
So you take your last couple of phrases and bring it to a close and they can continue. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Awesome. So I am curious what sort of insights or observations you had out of that conversation.
What did she say?
What kind of insights or observations came out of the conversation?
I think one of the things that came out of both of our stories was that regardless of who's giving or who's receiving, it strengthens the relationship between both. Like both feel that the other is more present for them and therefore they can be more present, and it's, you know, a cyclical relationship. So almost by doing, you're also receiving.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like this positive cycle for sure. Yeah.
That's interesting you brought that up, because in our group, we kind of started noticing that our answer to the first question was kind of part and parcel with the second question. And we noticed that things were simpler than we sometimes make it. Like they weren't crazy things. It was just a lot, sometimes just present.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it? So it's kind of exciting. Like when you realize that it doesn't have to be some heroic act of amazingness. It's like sometimes these tiny little nudges in a positive direction really matter.
Well, and it doesn't have to have your actions, of your experience that you give and they give back to you doesn't have to have a long shelf life and last for 6 months. It matters of the moment or of the time.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that right thing at the right time can last for somebody at both as the giver or of the receiver of that. That can be like a touch point and really stay with them for a long time. Yeah.
I think you can say, one of the things we talked about or came up was that between giving and receiving, a lot of times if you're giving, you don't know how much of an impact you're making upon that person. And you might just seem like, oh, we just had a nice little conversation, but that person, it could be huge. So
Yes.
I think that's why I had a hard time coming up with the first one, because I couldn't think of anything of all that grand, but then the second one I could really see, and because I think that you don't realize the impact you have on others just by being there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love that insight. And often we don't know that we've had an impact unless somebody comes and tells us. And so just kind of a side note, if you think about, well, who in this community or elsewhere in your life has maybe just been being themselves, but has made a difference to you, like you have such an opportunity to go back and let them know that, because they may have no idea that, you know, the fact that they smile at you matters to you or whatever the little thing is. Yeah, gorgeous. All right, let's move on. And if there's time at the end, we can go back to whatever, anything I didn't give you a chance to talk about. So we have a parallel slide here, which is how do we weaken those connections? And let's do the same thing as we did before. You can just say, what do you know weakens that sense of connection and belonging?
A mean word.
Mean words. Yeah, let's make that thinner. Yep. What
So
else?
thinking through, I don't know if you guys have seen this meme, but it says, be careful who you hate because it might be somebody you love. Sometimes you form this opinion about something and you don't know who you're talking about. You just have this generic opinion, and then when somebody puts a face on it, you think, oh, well, not them, you know? And so being careful to think through what you're actually saying and what you're actually impacting on people. You can hurt somebody who they're not even meaning to.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm picturing those conversations like I've been in, even like in a group, and somebody says, well, obviously, blah, blah, blah about this type of person. And I'm thinking either, well, ooh, I'm that type of person, or ooh, my best friend is that type of person. And it's like, ooh, right. Does that get what you were getting at?
Yeah, like if somebody says, well, you know, sorority girls or whatever, well, I was in a sorority, like, I don't think I'm a horrible, thoughtless Jolene.
Right. And geez, if I told you that about me, would you change your mind about sorority girls, or would you change your mind about me?
Yes,
Yeah. How else?
I think connections can be weakened when there's a lack of clear communication. And if I think I clearly communicated something, but the other person heard something differently and we didn't do a clarification or check for understanding, that can become it can break bridges.
Yeah. It's kind of, the word assumptions comes to mind. Like I thought I heard, but I made an assumption, and that can go off the rails somewhere. Yeah. If we don't check for understanding. Okay, one more. Let's see if we can get this line a little bit thinner.
I want to add one that I think interrupts connections a lot, which is pride. And so pride it takes a lot of forms, but I do think it always stands between people. So maybe sometimes we should approach people with a more humble attitude. And,
Interesting. And so when somebody's acting prideful, like what's a thing they would do that would have potentially not a good impact?
Well, it's a way of setting up barriers so they wouldn't talk to you, right? They might feel arrogant or, place themselves in a different level.
or not.
Yeah.
They do something wrong. Like not saying, oh, sorry, that was on me and I apologize and I'll be better in the future. Shaming somebody. through that.
Yeah.
And I could also think they're better than other people.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So many different expressions of that. Okay. We've got a nice thin line here. So our little micro actions have all contributed to weakening this relationship here. And then here's our slide. Yeah. Yeah, isn't it interesting? That last one, I heard somebody comment on it. There's this thing of like, oh, I'm so busy, almost as a badge of pride. But it's interesting to think about what is the impact on other people when that's kind of the vibe we've got in our lives. Okay. So we're going to do another share, same as last time. And I will say, Rachel, if I can put you entirely on the timing here, you tell me, could you hear me when I said halfway through and at the end, or was that just lost in the noise?
They could kind of hear the background. We could see that you were talking, but we couldn't really hear what you were saying.
I'll be better. I'm going to stand up. I'll monitor what I'm saying.
That would be great. That'd be super helpful. And I can still sort of say something at 2 minutes, but it may not make a difference. So here we go. Here's your next round of sharing. Same model as before, so 2 minutes per person. a time when someone acted in a way that caused you to go into that self-protective mode. And then this one is humbling for all of us, a time when you've done or failed to do something out of self-protection that may have had a negative impact on someone else. And just a point here is like, as human beings, we do this. Like, it stinks. Nobody wants to be that person who like made somebody else feel bad. But I know when I reflect, even just on the past couple of days, like, oh, geez, when I was distracted or in my own sort of stressed out place, I bet you what I did or didn't do wasn't great. So it's a point of awareness, and that's useful to recognize that just as much as other people can do things that maybe even unintentionally hurt us and make us feel excluded or like we don't belong, we can do that too. So here's the sharing time. Any questions before I set you off? Okay.
They look good to go. I'm starting.
All right. 2 minutes.
It's free. It's free.
Yeah.
We're okay. It was personal to me as a went to New Mexico.
Right, and switch. Okay, yep, if you have a chair,
And so we yeah, I don't agree with what you're saying. Not do something. Are you?
now is
We
still.
we did a process that we did.
You know.
Right.
Your body.
I don't know if that's a slide.
Bring up that chair. And the Lord be with you. And your eyes.
Failed.
And you're muted.
Hello?
And
You're muted.
There you go.
Yeah, it's not a video meeting if somebody isn't muted. Yeah, so Rachel, thank you for your help with that. I so appreciate it. That was great. Same question for this one. Any insights or observations from those conversations?
Kelly made an interesting point in that it's difficult to find where you hold a healthy boundary, but also try to give grace to that person, like to somebody who has hurt you and made you feel self-protected. It's hard to know which part needs to change, you or them.
That's great. Hold that thought. We've got one of my little diagrams. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, but you're right. And isn't that like the work of life right there? Gosh. Yeah, what else?
I recently was with a family member who thinks very differently from me politically and socially, and was being very outspoken about it. And I was in a car, and I purposely didn't respond, looked out the window and prayed for patience, because I didn't want to make the situation worse for another family member who's ill that was in the car. But that was okay. That was self-protection. And I'm invited to do that more in today's world. But my granddaughter started making a couple of comments that indicated she wasn't sold on her daddy's idea about things. Like she said, made blatant statements. Dad, I don't think we have anything to fear from gay people. Dad, I don't think they ought to go into schools and I should get kids. And again, I was quiet and I failed to say anything. I did have an opportunity one-on-one to talk to her and tell her that I was proud of her speaking up. And then that led to more of her defending her dad and the way he was brought up. And that's just really a tough situation, especially with family.
Yeah.
So I failed, but
Succeeded.
I was self-protected.
Yeah, that's right. And how interesting. One of the things I pulled from that is sort of in a group, in the car or in a community, not everybody's going to be on their best game at all times. And but then other people can be. So in this case, who was it who spoke up? It was
Granddaughter.
Yeah, the granddaughter, right? So she could speak up in that, and so she helped, influence the conversation there. And then at a different time, you could come back. So it's not, there's not like a perfect way for any of these interactions to go, but it's interesting how we can help each other by being strong when we're strong, and at the very best, just be quiet when we're not strong, not make it worse. Yeah.
I just want him to send me back to the airport.
Any other observations from that set of conversations?
We kind of talked about that when someone does something or says something hurtful that causes us to go into self-protective mode, that even years later, if we cognitively know the thing they said was not true, there is still something in us that voice comes back, it's stored in our body, like that's still there years later.
Emotional residue.
Yes. Even if we know it's not true.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Again, these little things can make this huge sort of outsized difference in people's lives. Yeah, and long term, it's true. I've lost my slideshow, so I'm going to bring it back. Okay, there. Okay. So this, I pulled out these four things to remember, which we've also, I mean, a lot of you sort of already spoke to them in your comments, but I'll put them up in writing here. So the first one is repair is possible. You know, when you go back later and have a repair conversation, or after ignoring somebody, if you reach out to them and give them attention or an apology or anything, there's so many things that can be done when you operate out of self-protection to repair. The process is dynamic. So those lines are always kind of thinning and thickening, depending on often these very small things that we're able to do or not do. Own this one. We've talked about in all the sections. Relationships are messy. It's just the nature of being alive. So again, there is no like perfection or like 100% clarity. And just acknowledging that I find pretty helpful. But then finally, this, like how to be in a relationship with other people, like, isn't this the work of community? This is in a way like what there is to do together. Almost, you have this amazing sort of practice ground to get better at this and to be with each other, which I think is an amazing thing about church. Okay, another diagram time here. So we're going to talk about relational space, which is just a fun concept that I find helpful. So we've got one person on one side, got another person on the other side of the relationship, and then in between, we've got this relational space. So one way we can think about what we've been talking about is anytime we do or don't do something, we're kind of putting something into this relational space. And when we're on the other end of it, we're receiving things and interpreting things that are happening in the relational space. And so when relationships feel good, I don't know if you saw that, maybe that happened too quickly, but when relationships feel good, there's, you know, something is given from one side of the space to the other. And you can see here, like, the impact that this thing given from essence, from the blue circle, had the impact on the other person of making their sun a little brighter. It made it a little bigger, a little brighter, made that essence shine more, and it thinned that layer of self-protection on the outside. And then from there, that felt really good. So we've got this positive cycle that we talked about before, and maybe they give something back into the relational space that also hits the core of the other person and brightens their sun and lowers their defenses. And so this is this positive cycle. And then relationships get messed up, right? So maybe in this case, the blue circle does the same exact thing. Maybe they give a compliment even, and they offer that over to the person on the other side, but it did not land as a compliment. And this is where we're not in charge and we don't always know what's happening with another person. So maybe this person on the right here was having a bad day, or maybe they have like a horrible history of being complimented in ways that actually don't feel good or that aren't authentic, or maybe they, I don't know, were just really busy and just couldn't even have time for a conversation to even acknowledge that they were being talked to. But for whatever the reason, this offering from the essence of one person did not land all the way into the other person's essence. And instead, it actually had maybe even the opposite impact. And so what do we often do when we feel like we are not getting something we want from another person? Do we operate from our essence necessarily, or do we tend to operate from our self-protection? Self-protection. Exactly. So here we go. So instead of coming back with maybe what this person on the left expected, which would have been like a thank you and a nice warm moment, they come back with maybe they make some sarcastic comment. And instead of it increasing the size of the first person's essence sun, it does the opposite to them too. And all of a sudden, in these little micro moments, we've gone from okay to a relationship that's more characterized by these things: hurt and disappointment and fear and resentment. And sometimes it's just a couple little tiny things that are enough to derail something that was okay into something that's kind of stuck. Because in this case, if something doesn't change, the blue person may not next time go back with something from their essence. They may go back with something that's more self-protective. And then you've got a cycle that goes down and down and down. And, you know, this is how the schisms happen. This is how the wars start. This is how, you know, the gossip starts. This is how the judgment and the fear and all of it just gets really emphasized. So this is not the cycle that we want, right? So this is kind of the $1 million question. And I'm putting it up here as a question rather than a step-by-step, here is the answer to this question, because there's a lot of different answers to this. And actually, I'm wondering here, Rachel, you and I talked about this a little bit, like, what are the religious and spiritual tools that get us back to essence? Do you want to say a little bit about what comes to your mind there? And then I'd love to open up to other people also about what do you know helps you when you've been kind of triggered into self-protection? What helps you get back to feeling safe and okay inside of yourself again? But would you be up? Yeah.
So I think it's probably on my mind because we've got Ash Wednesday this week. We're about to be in the season of Lent, and I'm thinking of confession. I mean, I'm thinking about reconciliation. That bullet point on the other slide that talked about relationship, the damage can be repaired. I think it's such a beautiful part of our faith and our practice. You know, every Sunday we have community confession. And so I always invite them to say, you know, what are the things that are, where does love and healing from God need to enter? And so I think of that as being a very specific right that we have in the church. And it's about restoring relationship, both between us and God and between us and others. And that is something that's always available, this ability to turn back, and how that's healing for both people.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Right. So confession, it's like, it's this sense of sort of coming to terms with, I did something I didn't want to do. I was the best I could, but it didn't have the impact that I wanted it to have. Like having a breath around that, feeling some grace around that, and remembering that even though you're imperfect as a human being, you still have this core essence you can go back to and live from again. That's my words I would put around that. What other practices do each of you have? I'm curious, when to calm yourself down and get yourself back to the person that you want to be.
I just need time. And I know sometimes it comes across as like me closing myself down to everyone else. And I guess I am really technically, because there's one particular chair in my house and I don't want other people to be there. But when I was younger, I reacted immediately to everything, and I have no intention of stopping that. And now I don't even want to, I don't feel the need to, but I still feel the reaction inside myself. And I don't want to do it right at that moment. I'm not even having to stop myself. It's just in me. And I need to be by myself so that can just sort of calm itself, because and then I'll go back, you know, I might say in the moment, I never want to speak to them again or whatever. And I can just, if I can have a little minute to get myself together, then I can start to make myself realize maybe it wasn't that big a deal, or I'm going to just go tell him that made me sad or that hurt my feelings. But I need time by myself at first.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. So the practice, and it sounds like you've learned one, that you need that time, one, how to take that time and make sure that you get that time. Yeah. And then figuring out what do you do in that time to help you do or let go and stop doing, to help the situation sort of flow through you. Yeah, beautiful. What else comes to mind from other people?
One of the tools that my therapist has given me is that I can send the emissary that can speak now, that even if I feel like build a small bridge. I think oftentimes I'm very black and white, and she basically encourages me to speak whatever part of the truth I could speak in that moment, even if it's not all of me, right? I always feel like I have to be totally vulnerable and tell them every single thing, and you know what I mean? And she's like, just say the thing that you can say right now, and even if it's not the whole truth, just say what you can say right now and leave the rest for another time, or maybe you have time and you don't have to say everything. That's not a lie. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm sad. I'm sad because you broke your heart and you're very things suck. I'm sad. I gotta go sit in my chair.
Yeah, or what you're asking is overwhelming, and I just need some time to think how I want to respond. You know what I mean? It's just that internal boundary versus like, well, now we're done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It sounds like the practice of self-awareness is so huge there, to even know like what's happening in me and what I would feel comfortable sharing. And it's like such a practice. Yeah. Beautiful.
One of the things that I sometimes do with my husband is later, when that situation is calmed down, whatever this argument or discussion was, at a completely different time, I will say, can you please tell me why you said X? And because I try to do that with myself, like, why in the world did I get so upset about such and such, right? But I will say to him, why did you say whatever? And his automatic response is always, I don't know. Because he's not super self-reflective, right? But if I can try and get him to think through that actual question, like what caused you to say that? The answer is typically not because I really felt that way and truly believed it. It was something else, which probably goes back to that self-protective thing, lash out first or whatever it might be. But being able to evaluate it later, whether it's yourself or to go to that person and say, can you explain what you meant by this thing? Can kind of help, or maybe not help, but maybe it would just change it in the future.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So there's a getting curiosity that you can come back. So you get curious maybe about what was happening for you, getting curious about what's happening for them, and potentially even like in that case, maybe even be able to help somebody figure out what was going on with them, especially if they don't have a particular practice for self-reflection. This is maybe a side comment, but I've been doing a lot lately around feelings and needs, and practicing even like in this underneath the umbrella of curiosity, not even just sort of what was going on when you said that, but did you say that, because you were feeling, because you were feeling unsafe and you had a need for reassurance, or did you do that because you felt threatened and needed comfort or something, and sort of to get people thinking about, gosh, what was I feeling, and like what was the need that I had that wasn't being met? We so often don't think in terms of feelings and needs so explicitly, but it can be super helpful.
Well, it can become very strengthening because, like, if you think about at work, a project, we always do what I call an after action review. We go back and we look at a project, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to do the next time? And if fights or arguments are supposed to not be you against me, they're supposed to be us against the problem, right? And you could go back and have an after-action review of the conversation. So having a conversation about how you held the conversation can make you be better communicators in the future, maybe. Hopefully.
Yeah, beautiful. So it's tools, and it's such a great reminder in this conversation about it's not all on you to do it right now in the moment, which is often impossible, but often we've got time and we've got space to come back and try again and do that repair after we've had some time to reflect, and to help other people reflect. So good. So I want to move on. And I realize as I'm doing this slideshow, I'm going to, like, after this, kind of put it into a little handout form and send it over so that if you want to refer to any of the diagrams or comments or anything, you can do that. But for now, I've got one more diagram to share. And this is around this question of, like, what are you responsible for? And what are you not? Where are your boundaries in these situations when either you're triggered into self-protection or somebody else is, or both? How do you go about this process of repair in a way that only takes responsibility for what's actually yours? So in this, we've got you on the one side, you've got the other person on the other side, you've got your responsibility and their responsibility. And so it kind of maps out pretty straightforward. Your responsibility is what you're giving and where you're giving it from. Their responsibility, and so you gave your compliment, or maybe you asked your question about what was going on for you or whatever. Anything that you do is yours. But everything about how they take what you do or say is theirs, and not under your control, as much as sometimes you want it to be. Sometimes the very best that you've got is not going to land the way you want it to. And that's just part of the messiness and frustration of being human. And likewise, it is totally their responsibility what they choose to give back. Whether they take the time to self-reflect and get back to their essence or not under your control. But how you receive what they do, how you interpret it, whether you make a judgment on them or their character or their goodness, or whether you get curious and sort of, or aware of, gosh, boy, they're really in self-protective mode or whatever it is, how you take what they do into yourself is completely yours, not up to them, even if you wish they had done something differently. So that's my diagram there. I wonder, do we have another 30 minutes or are we over time already?
We started at 11:30. I think you and I talked about somewhere between an hour and a half. So
yeah. So people aren't looking at their watches like it's time. I was curious to see how this would work if we can walk through an example. Actually, I'm wondering, because there are little interactions that are happening all the time where we're giving things and other people are receiving them, and they're giving things back to us and we're receiving them. I wonder if anybody has an example, and maybe here's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to start with an example from my own life. And this was from a couple of weeks ago, but when I was preparing this slide, it's what was on top for me. So the example was this. We had, this is going to be more complicated than I wanted. Anyway, so my husband had a death in the family a couple weeks ago, and he was worried about what would happen after the memorial service. He was worrying about parking back at the place where the reception was going to be. And he made a suggestion that that all of us in the family, instead of driving back to where the reception would be at his house, where it is mom's house, that we would all leave the cars at the funeral home and Uber back. So that's what he gave to me. And inside of me, I was like, that's a dumb idea. Nobody would want the family to take an Uber over to the reception. That's so stupid. That was my internal reaction. So he was like offering a suggestion / request. And I was like, no way. And so I had all my self-protection and my, what I do when I'm in self-protection mode is I get judgmental and like self-righteous. That's easy for me. But I didn't want to be that way. And so I did kind of what we were talking about before, is like, okay, what's happening? What am I feeling? What am I needing? What's going on? Trying to get back to essence. And I realized, I wanted things to go well. I wanted a sense of control, like a sense of safety and like predictability, and I wasn't getting it. And once I saw that, and also questioned sort of what's the bigger picture here and what's actually important, I could sort of let go of like, oh, I just want to get my way, and allowed his option and his solution to exist, so that when I went back to him, I was able to say, I'm not sure if that'll work, but I'm okay with trying whatever you think is worth it, whatever you think is the right thing to do. But it took something, and in another universe or a younger me, I would have made a great big giant fight out of it. I would be like, no, that's so dumb, we can't do it. And completely like blown this tiny little thing out of proportion, especially given the bigger picture that like we're a memorial service and there's much more important stuff going on, and like how are people getting from one place to another. So in that example, what he gave was the idea. How I received it was not well. Because I did a little work, what I gave back was some grace, and how he received it was actually coming up with a better solution than Ubering, and without any extra drama or challenge. So that's kind of a messy example, but hopefully it gave you all actually some time to think about what might be an example from your own life that would be interesting to talk about. And it could be either an example where you were happy with what you did, or maybe you wish you had done it differently. We can process either one. I see a hand. Yeah, what you got?
I have just a comment. I don't know if this is going to be what everybody wants to hear right now, and I don't want to pour water on the fire. This is a great fire burning right now. But I do think, when you start talking about repairing these connections, I just started thinking about there are times when that little protective thing around the edge is really necessary.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking about a friend that I had for many years, and I actually quit my job to go to work with him because he started a car business. And he turned out not to be at all my friend.
Mm.
The problem was that little boundary around me was made thinner by me towards him. But what was getting in were really hurtful arrows all the time. They weren't connections.
Mm.
Lightning bolts, And so what ended up happening is I had to build a big protection, and I actually severed the whole thing. And, I don't want to pour cold water on this whole thing, but I do think there's another side of this whole conversation we're having, which is about boundaries.
Yes.
And realizing when someone is not capable of having proper boundaries.
Yes.
And sometimes it's beyond repair. It's not something that you're going to think, well, Because if I thought that was repairable, I would have made the effort.
Yes.
It wasn't.
This is actually really, it's completely relevant. And when I'm thinking about repair, if you think about it in terms of how the diagram works, we want to focus 100% on your responsibility side of this equation. Because your friend did what he did and was who he was and wasn't able to do what he was and wasn't able to do. So everything in the conversation that's relevant has to actually do with what's happening on your side of the equation, including, and everything that matters on your side of the equation is, are you able to access within yourself your essence when you think about that person, when you interact or when you don't interact with that person, so that in your heart you're at peace, whatever you actually choose to do and choose to sort of throw into the relational space with them. So, for example, there's a difference between, and I'm so glad you brought this up, but there's a difference between cutting off a relationship with somebody and doing it out of like this fear and anger and resentment place where every time you think about them, even if they're not like in your life, you're still like, ugh, about it. Like that has a very different feel than getting back to my essence where I don't like how I'm being treated. This is not working for me. I do need to protect myself and my sanity and my peace of mind and like my wellness. So I am going to choose to separate from them and not maintain this relationship so that I can continue accessing the best parts of me. So it's less about actually whether you stay super close, connected and talking to a person all the time, but so much more like what's in your heart when you think about them and when you make the choices that you make in relating to them.
It seems like it is your responsibility to make that decision that this is not a healthy relationship for me, because now you're going to damage. If you allow that unhealthy relationship to continue, you're now changing who you are at your core, and that's going to impact all the other relationships you have. You're not going to be able to be you, your essence, your true self. And I think givers have a hard time with that. People who are giving from their soul, they think that if they don't forgive and forget and continue every relationship, no matter what, they fail. When really, you don't have to allow a relationship to continue. That doesn't mean you wish the worst for that person or you do something bad to them, but removing them from your life could be the absolute most responsible thing you could be doing for yourself to keep your own self.
Absolutely true. I actually teach a whole course about what are all the kinds of things that we can put into relational space from our essence. And some of it is stating boundaries. Some of it is, expressing our preferences, making requests, and kind of helping people learn how to treat us is something we can proactively do from our essence to make a relationship better. And sometimes relationship better means they shift how they respond to us and the interactions are good. And sometimes making a relationship better means a separation. And we have a better relationship now that we don't see each other than we did when we were like up close and personal.
Many years ago, I made a very difficult decision to get a divorce. And I was so worried about my children. And I was been a single parent since they were 4 to 5. But when my daughter graduated from college, she came to me and said, "Thank you for being a single mom and divorcing, because we would not be who we are today if you had stayed in that relationship." And that was, it was an unhealthy thing it was impacting them in a negative way. But so sometimes you just have to decide when you need to end something.
Yeah.
I can remember standing in my parents' house the first week thinking it would have been easier if he had died, because then I would get a lot of sympathy.
Right.
But right now, everybody's looking at me through critical eyes.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of, from all directions, there's challenge in that situation. It takes a lot of self-awareness and self-care in sort of space to get back to how do I show up in a situation that's so hard in a way that has access to my best thinking and my best heart. Yeah, so good.
I don't want to take up everybody. I don't want to, take your time, but I just want to say that what I thought of when Ann was just talking is that a lot about the responsibility that we have on our side is about being assertive, right? I think a lot of times if people aren't assertive, they're not communicating. They're not communicating their essence to the other person.
Yeah. Especially if you err on the side of kind of a people pleaser or a giver or a nice person or whatever. It's often a missing piece, right? And you could be even more fully, responsible to your relationships to beef that part up. Does that capture what you meant?
Yeah, like having the, I guess, courage, right?
Yeah.
To try to make that positive connection, but sometimes it creates conflict, but there's a way to have that in a healthy way. Right?
Yes. Yeah, and I love that you use the word courage, because it takes that, like, to do relationship takes courage, precisely because you can do the best that you do from your side on your responsible side, and you just back to, like, you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know how what you're going to get back, and it's a risk, and yet it's like essential. It's essential to belonging. It's essential to feeling connected with somebody, is to lean in to those conversations. I'm seeing the room empty out, so I'm going to just fast track this. We're almost done. So here's homework, and it's a noticing practice, because we keep talking about sort of self-awareness, what's happening in me, and that is so much of the work in all of this. So notice when you're in essence. Notice, hey, I'm accessing that part of me that feels wonderful and is powerful, and appreciate that that's true. And to the extent that you can, share that in some form with other people by giving from that place, or even just by expressing from that place. And then when in self-protection, notice that too, and offer yourself self-compassion and grace, because that's always the first step to getting back to essence and figuring out what you can proactively do. So that's your homework. I'll put it in the handout when I get to that. And then just a preview. I think, Rachel, actually, do you want to talk about these upcoming dinner?
Sure. Yes. So as you see here on this very handy slide, thank you for this. Our Wednesday nights will kick off March 19th. So just that reminder, this coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. The next week is spring break, so we'll take that week off. And then we'll dive into these starting March 19th. It'll be at 6:30 to 7. We'll do dinner. And then at 7, we'll gather in this space. Fully confident in all of our technology plans. And then we'll meet again with Ann in this hybrid format. And I think it'll be an hour of work, right? An hour of time together. Yeah. And so each of these weeks, right, we will begin to practice some of the elements that help us be in this relational space. Sharing information and getting to know each other, sharing desires, asking for help, sharing gratitude and appreciating connection. And then we'll talk about what are some tangible things going forward. How does this play into our growth work as we go out into the world and start making relationships and connections with others. So each of these is going to be a really practical, hands-on element of being in relationship. Did I cover that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a little bit about, there's the building connections and relationships within the community that shows up for church. And then there's how are you as individuals and as a group showing up in the wider community to make connections and to be of service out there. And one thing just to mention, it was interesting, one of the questions on the survey was what would help increase belonging within the St. Cornelius community. And a lot of people said extending our friendliness to new people, proactively spreading it out to public places, doing group outings, doing activities, and like being of service out in the world. By doing that, like it strengthens belonging within your group. So that's just, there's such an interest in that, which is kind of where we're headed with all of this.
Thank you, Anne.
There.
Let's all give Anne a round of applause.
Yay. Thank you. Received. Thank you. And thank you so much for showing up and for being part of this conversation. I look forward to having more.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was pretty good.
Yeah.